All right. So 2 weeks ago, we nearly finished our lesson 19 on profanity. And so we're going to finish that up today. I appreciate, haven't had a chance to mention, but I appreciate Nolan taking Sunday morning for me, the class, and Neil preaching for me last Sunday. Had a pretty bad cold. I'm better, but I'm still kind of hacking a little bit. So we are at number 3 on the very last page of our lesson, lesson 19. This is page 97 in your books. We've been discussing profanity not just from the perspective, our immediate thought process is the words that come out of the speech that people commonly refer to as profanity. But I appreciate our lesson, how that the lesson doesn't look at it just from the terms of speech. It looks at it from the definition to profane something or to make unholy that which should be holy in particular. And so we've already talked about profane speech a little bit, and this is part of what he's discussing, being confronted with profanity, profane speech, and now we're on profane actions. He says, and there's several aspects to this that he describes, but profanity is certainly seen in the lives of those who are too busy seeking after pleasure to acknowledge their Creator. They're too self-absorbed to have any reverence or regard for the God who made them. Romans 1, verses 20 to 21, obviously, in talking about the sins of the Gentiles, we know that no one has an excuse. Everyone has had the opportunity, even going back to the Gentiles, all the way back to Adam and Eve. Man has always had the knowledge of what is necessary to please God. Always. God has never left man without that information. Just because man turns away from it and chooses to profane the teaching of the Lord doesn't change the fact that God's given us what we need. Many Christians live profane lives simply by placing worldly matters ahead of serving the Lord. Profanity is prevalent when parents make time for their children to be involved in Little League and Scouts but cannot find time to bring them to Bible study, gospel meetings, or teach them God's Word at home. Profane parents help their children become star athletes and honor students, but do very little to bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. As a result, they raise profane children who grow up to be profane adults. They may attend with the church as long as their parents make them, but as soon as they're old enough to make their own decisions, they will be off pursuing the worldly goals that their profane parents taught them to place ahead of spiritual things. Don't be surprised if this scenario sounds familiar. Profanity is popular. And I appreciate the application of recognizing the perspective, the priorities that as Christians we need to have in this world, not only for ourselves, but also for our family and our children. Making sure we emphasize the spiritual, not just at the same level of academics or sports or anything else, but emphasizing the spiritual above all else. Because if we give even the impression that scholastic work, academic work, or sports is more important than serving God and doing what God wants us to do, what's going to happen when those children get out in the world?
Well, they follow those because they've been taught that important.
Yeah, and that's the point he makes. Ultimately, those profane children become profane adults. Children who should know and you know the thought process. I think a lot of times the idea that our children get plenty of what they need to know at worship service or at Bible class is, it's first of all, it's inaccurate. But second of all, unfortunately, it's prevalent in a lot of minds of parents, I think, in the church, unfortunately, because the thinking is that I don't really need to do a lot myself because the church will take care of it. Is it the church's job to train your children? Is it the church's job to raise your children in the admonition of the Lord? Whose job is that? Parents. Okay, the father, Ephesians 6, verse 4, and the mother also obviously involved in that as well. It is our job individually as parents to make sure our children are raised to know the truth, to make sure they're trained in the Word. And unfortunately, when children aren't trained in the Word, they're not encouraged by the parents or shown by example even. That God's Word and serving God, attending worship and so forth is more important than anything else. What we end up doing is we end up, in many ways, do as I say, not as I do. Okay? Especially if in our own lives, maybe we make exceptions for certain things. You know, maybe there's a big football game on this morning, and so we're going to skip I'm going to skip church and stay home to watch the ball game. Or maybe, I deliberately choose a job that requires me to miss worship service, and so I choose the pursuit of money or a career over attending with the saints. My example can easily be one of this world is more important than the next if I'm not careful. And a lot of times we can set that example without even realizing it if we aren't aware of ourselves and aware of making sure we're putting God first in the things that we do. It's one thing to say it, and it's another thing to actually show it in our example and our conduct throughout the week. And certainly, a lot of people, when they think about training their children in the admonition of the Lord, they think they have to have family Bible studies. And certainly family Bible studies are good. I think they're great. But that's not just what that's about. It's not limited to that. It's talking to our children one-on-one about God's Word, asking them where they are in terms of their thought process, and maybe they haven't been baptized yet. Asking them, where are you on that? How can I help you with that? Do you have any questions about that? And trying to help them to grow in appreciating God's Word and putting God's Word first. And I really appreciate the point that he makes that this is something that unfortunately can happen, again, without people realizing it. And by the time we do, it's too late. Thoughts or comments through that? All right, let's move on to our questions. All right, matching, profane. Okay, C, permitted to be trodden or made unholy, made common is the aspect of that. Number 2, euphemisms. E, mild word used in place of an offensive one, which, as we talked about before, euphemisms, especially the ones that he brought up in our lesson, and there's several others that he didn't include as well, that sound pretty much the exact same as whatever offensive word it is. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't make it any better. Just because we're not saying that exact word doesn't change maybe the anger we're using it in or the way in which it's being used. Number 3, perfect guide in religion. F, the scriptures. Number 4, the mouth speaks. B, out of the abundance of the heart. Number 5, profane person. A, Esau. Number 6, profane and idle babblings. D, increase to moral ungodliness. All right, true or false? True or false, not true of false. Number 1, the only people who live a profane lifestyle are those who are not religious. False. And to a certain extent, especially, maybe even more so, those who consider themselves religious or consider themselves faithful people, because you're taking something that should be holy and you're making it unholy or common, especially. Number 2, one can profane the church by changing the pattern of worship given in the New Testament. True, absolutely. You can profane the church and the Word of God by doing so. Number 3, it is okay to listen to dirty jokes as long as you're not the one telling them. Ideally, we wouldn't hear that stuff at all ever, right? Now, sometimes it's going on at work, it's going on at school, and there's not a lot we can do to get away from it. But even more specifically, should we be joining in? Should we be laughing, considering those things entertaining? No. That's right. That's a great point. Yeah, and that speaks whether it's profanity or whether if people know you're religious and they know that you don't join in and you don't appreciate those things, it may not prevent them from doing it anyway, but people who respect us, people who actually care, they won't be saying those things around us, or they'll do it quieter or something along that line because we don't join into it. And that, you're right, that speaks to our character, and that also speaks to the example we set that they know that that's not the type of entertainment we enjoy, for instance.
Sometimes you can't say religious because they think they're religious, but they can still be.
That's right. That's right.
They have the conviction that they need to be influenced.
Right. Yeah. All right. Number 4, we have no control over the foul language we hear in television and in the movies. Okay, I mean, it is true in that we have no control over it in the sense that, I mean, it's going to be there regardless, right? We can't control that. There's not, there used to be technology that we could, be able to eliminate those things from TV and stuff. It's not as popular now. But in terms of, do we have control over whether or not we choose to listen to them? Yes. Okay, or watch these things that, and again, we talked before about filling our minds with things of God versus filling our minds with things of Satan or the devil. And even from the perspective of if we're not filling our minds with things of God, Philippians 4:8, meditating on things that are pure and holy and of good report and so forth, nature abhors a vacuum. And in the end, if we're not filling our mind and our heart with things of God and thoughts that are pertaining to God or the soul or spiritual things that are pure, then what's going to automatically going to fill in? Things of the world. Okay, and so we have to be aware of that, and certainly we have enough troubles and enough trials in our world without adding to it willfully by filling our minds with things that are defiled or profane, things of the world, entertainment of the world. Number 5, some children quit worshiping God because their parents failed to raise them properly. True. Sure. But I think that's a statement, we read that and we go, ooh, that's kind of harsh. But the fact of the matter is it's true. Okay, if we're not putting the time into, now does that mean just because we raise our children in the admonition of the Lord, do our best to train them and teach them, does that mean they're going to be faithful the rest of their lives? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Okay, we can do the best we can, and as Nola pointed out, ultimately everyone has to make their own decisions, their own choices. Our children are going to experience life, the ups and the downs, and sometimes they're going to have to do that on their own when they're in life. And we have to trust in God and trust that we've done the best we can to give them the foundation to fall back on, even when times are difficult, that they're going to trust in the Lord and be faithful to Him. But that doesn't mean they're always going to be faithful, that they're always going to make the right decisions. But the fact of the matter is, yes, some children do quit worshiping God because parents didn't care enough, or again, assume that they were getting it all at church, okay, or being around maybe other friends at church by osmosis. It just kind of sunk into them somehow, and I don't really have to talk to them about spiritual things. And this goes back to, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, lesson, or 3 weeks ago, lesson we had on the need to teach. Of course, we were applying that, especially as a congregation, having teachers, but also from an individual perspective, being able to talk to our children about spiritual things. Sometimes, sometimes we may feel uncomfortable or awkward trying to talk to our kids about that. And if that's the case, then we need to do it all the more so that it's not awkward or uncomfortable. I mean, the first time or the first few times you do something that you're not used to doing, is it going to be awkward and uncomfortable for us? Yeah, that's just the way it is. Sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable. But the more we do it, and we've talked about this before, repetition breeds confidence. The more I do something, the more I get used to it, the more I understand how to do it, the more confident I get, and the more comfortable I get. And that's important for us to be able to talk to our kids to make sure, not only for ourselves, but for our kids to know that I can talk to mom and dad about these things, about these religious things, or about temptations I'm facing, or whatever it may be. I can talk to them about it, and it doesn't have to be awkward. It doesn't have to be uncomfortable. I don't have to dread it. Because if a kid dreads talking to a mom and dad about something, what's going to end up happening? They're not going to talk to mom and dad about it. Yeah, if it's something they're going to dread doing, they're not going to do it. But we want our kids to talk to us. We want to know what's going on so we can help them to be prepared in life, to be prepared to be faithful servants of God. Number 6, profanity only has reference to our speech. False. Yeah, and that's one of the great things about this lesson. I appreciate the fact that he opened that up not just to speech, but to every basically walk of life as a Christian. Yes, sir.
And before we leave number 5, I just wanted to just add in that even as a dad, just going to church, just being religious, that's still not enough. I think of 3 in a row in the Old Testament, the judge Eli, the judge Samuel, and then the King David. David called the man after God's own heart. 3 fantastic guys in a row, and all 3 of them seem to have been terrible failures as dads.
Yeah.
Even though they have fantastic qualities individually, they were all religious, but their kids were a disaster. It seems like they failed to realize what they
And that was a failure that was shared by all of Israel at multiple points in times as well. How often in Deuteronomy, just Deuteronomy by itself, are the children of Israel called to teach your children, tell these things to your children, talk about them when you rise up, when you lie down. And again, that goes back to filling our minds with things of God. And if our minds are filled with the spiritual, our minds are filled with thoughts of what God wants from us, then there's going to be little room for cares of the world and things of sin and Satan to get in. But if we start slacking off in that, it ends up creating a vacuum in people's minds and hearts, and especially our children. And that's why it's so important to maybe on the way to school, before we drop our kids off, maybe saying a prayer, that our kids have a good day, and our kids are praying, right along with us, that they have a good day, that they're focused on being a good example, things like that, to kind of just to start the day off in a way that I'm not only here to be a student, I'm here to be a good example. And maybe maybe it is family Bible studies. That's a great thing to be able to do. Being consistent in it is very difficult, especially, the way things exist with families, kids doing things and so forth. That's why you have to put forth what's important first. But being able to talk to our kids about the Scriptures on a daily basis, or bring up spiritual thoughts on a daily basis, is very important. And like Gilbert said, we have great examples of individual faith in men like Eli, like David. We have individuals who did great things and moved by faith, and yet for whatever reason, okay. And again, we don't know all the details of all the things and examples of these men and how they were as fathers and so forth, but we have several examples of faithful men who, for some reason, their kids did not turn out. And again, just because that doesn't necessarily mean that somebody's a bad parent. But when you have a pattern of it, when it shows forth that way, sometimes it does speak to maybe a lack of focus on teaching children. Maybe, again, it goes back to an assumption that they're getting it. I assume they're getting it. Am I giving it to them? No, but I assume they're getting it somehow, somewhere, at church. But that goes back to us making sure that we're doing our job, not trying to assign it to the church or the priesthood, maybe in the Old Testament or whatever. Any other thoughts to that? All right. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on the discussion part. I want to get to lesson 20, but the points that he brings up, or the questions he brings up: the Israelites committed profanity in religion. Describe how the church can be profane today in the following areas. And of course, throughout our lesson, we talked a little bit about this regarding morality from the perspective of what are we as Christians and as a church going to stand for regarding the truth of God's Word versus what other religious organizations are willing to compromise the truth on in an effort to appeal to society, in an effort to get people in the pews. They compromise what God teaches regarding, and I don't like using the word morality or moral, because for most people in our world, that concept designates a separate standard from God's Word. To me, God's Word includes the concept of what we would call moral or morality, whereas our culture tends to separate those two things. But certainly, standing in the truth of God's Word, the worship of the church we talked about, when we change, when we add to or take away from what God has given us regarding command and example in the New Testament regarding the church, we profane the worship of the church and its work. Its work is to be the pillar and the ground of the truth. And when we add or take away from it, we profane it. The mission of the church, again, which is to be the pillar and the ground of the truth, to reach out and to teach the gospel, to encourage and edify those members of the church who are faithful. When we profane God's Word, when we try to take out or add to or change it up somehow, we profane it. Question 2, why is Esau considered a profane person in Hebrews 12:16? What made him profane that the Hebrew writer specifically brings out?
Just something that was sacred and sold it for a bowl of soup.
Yeah, he sold his birthright for a bowl of soup. Something that was supposed to be set apart for him. It was specifically for him. Okay, there was the birthright and the firstborn blessing, and he missed out on both Certainly the second one was a little bit of trickery there involved, but the first one, he just willingly gave up for a bowl of soup. Now, whether or not he really was on the cusp of death like he thought he was, there are times, though, when we're really hungry. Do we feel like we're about to die? Okay, now Esau, I mean, he was a man of the fields. He knew hunting. Maybe he really was on the cusp of death, and we don't know. But the fact that the Hebrew writer brings out that it was very kind of fickle, just a very unworthy reason to sell something that was sacred, that should have been set apart, and yet he was willing to part with it so easily. And I think that speaks to, again, ultimately, the ultimate application of that is our soul, right? I mean, what is it profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses his own soul? Well, how easily we can trade in our soul for the equivalent of a bowl of soup, right? And that's kind of the application there that the Hebrew writer makes about let none of you be as Esau was, willing to give up something sacred and pure for something fickle and temporary, which is the application of our soul, trading it in for affairs of this world, cares of this world, sinful things of this world. Number 3, how can we guard against the profanity that may come from the following sources? Television, obviously being aware of what we're watching, certainly in the presence of our family, for one thing. That's becoming more and more and more difficult. But even if it's just us or us and our spouse or whatnot, we want to be careful what we're filling our minds with and be aware of the impact it can have, whether you think it has an impact or not. Anytime you fill yourself with the thoughts of this world, it's going to seep in somewhere. Okay, it's going to seep in somewhere. We have to be careful. Movies the same way. Music, that's one thing that the lesson didn't really, we talked about movies and television, but music, the type of music we listen to, and not just, again, and a lot of times this is describing, or this is applied as listening to profanity. But what other topics should we be aware of that when we listen to it enough, sometimes it can seep into our thought process beyond just the words we say? I mean, what about fornication? Is TV, movies, music full of references to fornication? Worldly, physical concepts contained in them? Okay, in fact, Elizabeth and I, we sometimes, every now and then, a 90s song will pop on the radio, a song that, we listened to growing up. But since we're older, for some reason, we actually listen to the lyrics, whereas before we never really listened to the lyrics. We just listened to the melody. And now we listen to some of those songs from the 90s and we're like, I had no idea that's what that song was about. There have been several occasions where we've had that conversation. I had no idea that's what that song was about. And it's things like that, being aware of I mean, sometimes a melody is great, but if it's filled with things that are words that are bad, thoughts that are bad, things that we shouldn't be thinking about or talking about, is that actually going to help us in being a servant of God? And this is where entertainment, we have to be very careful in our choice of entertainment. We have to ask ourselves, is this going to be a detriment to me, a stumbling block to me, or is this going to help me? And unfortunately, too often as Christians, maybe we make compromises on those things that we ought not. And we have to be careful about that. Certainly friends and co-workers. Remember, we talked about Paul making the statement, do not be unequally yoked to non-believers. Those who don't care about God, those who don't care about spiritual matters, being aware of how much their influence on us may cause us to drift away from God. And sometimes that may mean not being as close to even a family member that may be a bad influence on us. We want to be a good influence on them, but can that work the other way sometimes? Yeah. And we have to be aware of the fact that other people's influences, when we're around other people, if that's causing us to no longer be what we're supposed to be, whether it's friends, coworkers, classmates, or even family members, that we make sure maybe we have to step aside a little bit from that friendship or step aside a little bit from that relationship and still have that dialogue, but instead of being close friends or best friends or whatever, maybe we kind of take a step back and focus on us being the proper example we're supposed to be, especially if someone is having an undue influence on us. Thoughts or comments to that? Sometimes that's just the way it is, especially in a world that is filled with worldly people, people who don't seem to care sometimes about, and a lot of times it's easy to identify people who are very worldly. But what about friends and coworkers who are religious? Okay, you would tend to think that maybe we would gravitate more towards people who are at the very least religious. But what happens when those religious people have a very liberal view of what God's Word says and how His authority is established? Do we have to be careful even then? Can their influence rub off on us in the way we view God's Word? Yeah. Yeah. And so sometimes maybe the temptation is to let our guard down when we're around other religious people or spiritually minded people in the world, but they don't believe the way we do, and they don't worship the way we do. And we have to be careful not to let our guard down, because even though they're maybe spiritually minded or religious, the thoughts that they have on things can rub off on us if we're not careful.
It's not believe how we believe what God wants.
That's right. This is what the Bible says.
You don't say we, you say God.
That's right. This is what God says.
Like you're better than I am or something.
Right. Yeah. All right. Number 4, is it wrong to use euphemisms? Yeah. Okay. And by euphemisms, I'm talking especially words that are designed to fill in the blank of what we might call a bad word, but it sounds virtually the same. Okay. And words like, and we talked about, OMG and things like that, where it's just an acronym, a shortened form of the exact same thing, but everybody knows what it means. And so taking that and replacing it with taking God's name in vain is not actually changing anything. Now, there are other things we can say, onomatopoeias and things that maybe are silly. Like I mentioned a couple weeks ago, my dad used to say "good gravy," because it was something silly that made him think of not being so angry. It's something that he used that would remind him that it's not that big a deal. Whereas people in the world, they use these words in anger and in malice and in cursing at times, and being very careful that just because we're not saying that exact word. In fact, this was a big deal when Elizabeth and I were at Florida College. There were all kinds of substitutions for words that sounded exactly the same, that when the person would start the word, you're thinking that they're about to say a cuss word, but then it's slightly different or slightly changed, and yet it's no different whatsoever. And that was a big thing. I don't know if it still is or not, but I know that was a big thing then. Yeah, go for it.
I know this kind of dates me, but that's all right. We have kind of lost our society one of the biggest tools to help, especially kids, on this number 4. I had the opportunity to teach. I think it was an elementary Bible class. I think it was 6th grade, and I was making this point. And it was very obvious that the kids did not believe what I was saying, that these words meant something. So here's what was lost. I was able to go to the shelf and just get a paper dictionary and say, oh, here, let me prove it to you. Look that up. And when they were able to look up G-E-E-O, so then it was, oh, that's not Boomer saying that. Hey, here's the book. Oh, this is really what it meant. And it just helped those kids a lot. A lot of people simply don't know that, hey, there's a literal, this really is what a euphemism is.
Yeah. Yeah, when people grow up hearing, G's, okay, and their parents maybe never say Jesus, they just say G's, okay, a kid may never know that that's actually what it's saying. That's what it means. And the same thing is true with many of these euphemisms, again, that are designed to fill in so you don't, quote unquote, take God's name in vain or whatnot, and yet it's no different. It means the exact same. And we have to be very careful. And this is, unfortunately, this is prevalent in among many brethren as well. And I think that may speak to a lack of willingness to apply God's word in a way that maybe may step on toes when people use these types of things and they say, well, I'm not saying the bad word, and then somebody tells them that's not right. That can step on toes and make people upset. But does that change the fact that these are still substitutions for the same thing? No. And it also speaks to our willingness and desire to be able to train our tongues, train what we say, think about what we're saying before we say it. And again, as we mentioned before, going back to the concept of sometimes what we choose to be around, how we fill our minds with things. Sometimes when you are around profanity a lot, whether it's at work or at school or you're listening to these things, and you stub your toe, you used to just say ouch or whatever, and now all of a sudden maybe something pops into your head that ought not. You know, how other people would react in that type of situation, that's not how I want to react. And unfortunately, as we talked about a couple weeks ago, once you start opening the floodgates of using that language or even thinking that language, it's all the more difficult to stop. Okay, like I said, I know of an individual who, when they were younger, used that type of language all the time. And then when they were older, they trained it out. They trained it out of them. But now, even now, it is still so hard for them to not say it, much less not think it. Especially in a moment of anger or in a moment of pain, that's their automatic reaction. And it's so difficult to train that type of behavior and that thought process out once it's started. I saw a hand somewhere. Yeah, Pam. Right. Yeah. Right. Right. Sure. Right. Right. Yeah. Well, I know, like, you know, with many of, and it's true for both genders, but I don't know why. Maybe it's because I have 3 girls, but for the female persuasion, using the name of God in vain is just it's all over the place. You know, it's in YouTube videos, it's on TV shows, it's everywhere, and guys are guilty of it too. But it's kind of shocking when someone isn't used to hearing that, and all of a sudden you hear it 10 times in a row in 10 words. You know, and it's just like, why is she saying that? Why is she doing that? And again, that may speak to certainly lack of education regarding God's word, but certainly having a lack of something better to use or to say, or a way of expressing themselves. And that was something I think I've spoken with somebody else before about being able to express ourselves in ways that are straightforward rather than resorting to words. Because that's what most people's argument is. Well, it's just a way of expressing myself. And certainly our society is all about expressing yourselves today. And yet, how can we express ourselves in a fundamentally proper way, first of all, way that God would approve, but also in a way that is informative and helpful, not just expressing ourselves using 4-letter words that don't really have any helpful ways of expressing what we're thinking or what we're talking about or what we're feeling and so forth. It just, like you said, it kind of speaks to lack of education, lack of ability to lack of vocabulary maybe in some cases. All right, anything else through number 4? Go ahead, Joe. Self-control.
You don't have to say anything.
Right. You're right.
People hit their finger with a hammer and not say a word. You don't have to say something.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I mean, our first instinct is to yell out in pain. Okay, that's an onomatopoeia. You yell ouch or whatever. But as Joe pointed out, you don't have to say anything. Maybe you're screaming on the inside, but you don't have to say anything. And that's a great point. Nolan?
On this question 4, I believe different categories of euphemisms. I couldn't just answer yes.
Yep, that's true. That's true.
For dirtier curse words, yes.
Yes.
When I was growing up, we used to say somebody died, and now they're expired, they're deceased, they're
Yeah.
whatever, some softer form.
Sure.
Okay. But I understand. I, like you, appreciate this entire lesson. He just entitled Profanity. Like, the first thing comes to mind define our words and things like that, but there's so much more to it, as he brought out.
Right.
Back on the question as of like worship of the church with regard to music. I get hit all the time. People, Nicholas talked about your character. Oh, you know who's coming to town for a concert? So and so's coming. I probably haven't heard it, but they expect it's a religious band or somebody.
Yeah.
People taking psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. The message, the wording may still be great, but they've turned into entertainment. They've profaned or made common things that God wants to be separate or
Right.
different. And so there it's not bad words being used. It may be based on scripture or a biblical character story. But now it's laser light show and entertaining.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just things to be careful with.
Right. And how we, and people have asked before, is it wrong to listen to the gospel stations? I don't know those of you who've been through Iowa Park, but the Lowe's grocery store there in Iowa Park, they play gospel music all the time. That's the only station they play. And I've been in there and I hear some of these are hymns that I know, and of course they're set to music. And the question that I get is, well, it's better than listening to a lot of the nasty songs and so forth. And that, yeah, that's true. But again, when I'm filling my mind with things that I know aren't the way God's word is to be used, or how hymns and spiritual songs are to be used, okay, that then sets kind of a precedent in my mind. And even today, when we sing Amazing Grace, I have to actively block out Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, when Scotty's playing the bagpipes after Spock died. Sorry, spoilers. After Spock died. And it's a beautiful rendition of Amazing Grace. And yet, when we sing Amazing Grace, that's the very first thing that pops in my head, because I watched it when I was so young, probably. But that was the first thing that pops in my head sometimes. And I have to actively push that out of my mind so that I'm not thinking about that when we're singing Amazing Grace. And that can happen so easily, and in other ways that can be manifested in things like that. And so exposing ourselves to things, even though they may be better from a degree of sin, which there is no such thing as a degree of sin, but we will think, well, it's better than filling our minds with this stuff. And yet when we fill our minds with something that theoretically should be better or more holy, or however you want to phrase that, and yet it's still wrong, it's still not what God wants from us, that can be just as problematic. Maybe in other ways, but it can be just as problematic. First of all, I saw a hand over. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm nearly 60, and I've just learned that G's is short for Jesus.
There you go. Yeah.
It was never a cuss word
Yeah.
to me. I didn't know.
Yeah.
I thought it was an alternative.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And you're probably not alone, Kurt. I mean, there's probably a bunch of people that, and again, there's several in the lesson that he brings out. G's wasn't one of them, but, there's several that maybe we grow up hearing or thinking, and yet we don't realize that's what it's short for. Now, fortunately, that also means that maybe when we're saying that word, we're not thinking of something we ought not to, but at the same time, being aware of what we're saying and what it means, realizing words do have meaning. Okay, they do have power, and realizing that what we say or what we don't say can either set us apart or make us more like everybody else. Go ahead, Gilbert.
Hey, Michael, quick comedy. I'm going to help you out this morning, and I will not lead Amazing Grace.
Thanks, Gilbert. I appreciate it.
Glad to help.
Thank you, buddy. You got my back. Yes, sir. Wow, Nolan. Yeah, Absolutely. That's a great point. And I'm not going to put no one on the spot and ask how many years ago that was, but think about the fact that, and we mentioned this before, one of the quickest ways that Satan can get to an entire generation of Christians is when they're not taught some application of God's Word. Now, sometimes, it's because, the preacher, the elders, they aren't willing to stand up for the truth. They're not willing to teach the truth. But you know what? There's only so much time that we can spend teaching and preaching from the pulpit or in class. So what else does that speak to? What does that speak to the need for? Mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, aunt and uncle, helping us to teach and teach our kids, here's how to apply God's Word. Here's these things that you need to be aware of. Because, we can only cover so much. We can't cover everything that everyone needs to know to be faithful. And I've mentioned this before. If the only times that and Seth mentioned this in his Wednesday night class, if the only times, or Wednesday night exhortation, the only times we're opening up our Bibles is on Wednesday and Sundays, we're not going to make it to heaven. End of story. Because we're not exposing ourselves enough to God's Word. We're not spending time to be diligent and to study to show ourselves approved. If all we're spending is 4 hours a week in God's Word, and that's only when we're together, we're not going to make it. It doesn't work that way. That's why it's incumbent on every individual to focus on their growth. This is part of the reason why Paul, he wrote to one congregation to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. He doesn't mean to figure it out. He literally means work out your own salvation. You are responsible for your own salvation, your own knowledge, to make sure you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. The church can stand for the truth and teach the truth on things, but we can't cover every possible application. And that's where training our kids comes in. Go ahead, Noah.
Christina has some words of wisdom.
Oh, okay.
Because I am a little confused. So what you're saying is if a song which has music to it outside of our worship has a spiritual message which uses God, Jesus, or some sort of spiritual message that comes from Scripture, that is sinful to listen to? Is that, am I understanding?
No, I'm not saying it's sinful to listen to. I'm saying that it can be just as problematic as listening to anything else in the world. Because if we're filling our mind with melody that is including instruments, then all of a sudden that sets the precedent in our mind that that's something that's okay. Because now we're listening to a station all day that it may be singing spiritual songs, but how often do we catch ourselves singing along with it? And how then we move from listening to it to singing along with it to it being something that we're used to hearing instrumental music set to gospel music or gospel worship or hymns, and all of a sudden that becomes in and of itself an influence that is evil, that is sinful. So I'm saying that just like everything else, we have to be very careful that we don't allow that influence to change the way we view worship and how we view making melody in our hearts. Because if we are thinking, and when we sing hymns and we're thinking about the instrumentation and all that stuff with it, then that takes away from what God wants from us.
I think sometimes, though, music can stick words in your head.
Sure, absolutely. And that's to say that there's music that's non-gospel music that can be just as helpful and good and reminding of family and so forth like that. But there can also be evil influences to it. And that's why I say, just like with everything else, we have to guard ourselves and be aware of the fact that I may listen to this song, it may have instruments to it, but that doesn't mean it's okay, that it's right to have done that.
So my other question would be the songs that are written into the songs. They were written with music in mind, correct?
Some of them were. Okay. All right. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll touch on that again next week, and maybe you and I can talk a little bit afterwards as well. Thank you, everybody.